again Juan Fernandez by popular demand, uh, giving his presentation about how to build your first infosec lab, part 2. The first part is on YouTube, so you can watch the first part first. Okay, continue. Juan.
Yeah, awesome. Hello, everybody. Thanks for making it. Very happy to be back here to do this part two of the lab. Focus more around the networking part of it. So for those of you who may have missed the first part, we went over kind of the basics, right? How to get your first hypervisor set up. We added a Kali or a parent machine, depending on which one you choose, to kind of use it as our main attack machine. And then we added um, at least one target machine or multiple target machines. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of the networking. And before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So as Liam mentioned, I'm Juan Fernandez. I work as a systems engineer or voice engineer at a software company called Well, and I'm based out of Chicago. I also have the pleasure of lead the Chicago chapter for Raices Cyber, and I Yep. On the side of Raices and my full-time job, I volunteer as the state coordinator in Illinois for the Information Technology Disaster Research Center. So as you can see, a pure IT nerd through and through. Been playing with computers since I was about 5 or so, and I'm still learning things, or as I prefer to say, I'm still breaking things. After breaking them, I have to figure out how to put them back together. So that's how the learning happens. At any point during the presentation, feel free to stop me. Feel free to ask questions. If I'm going too fast, if you didn't quite catch something, let me know. We can go through it again, or slow down. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through networking. So we're going to be adding a pfSense VM into the lab. So hopefully you still have the lab you built on the first version of this event, or you can quickly add it all together. We are going to be doing this in Workstation. That just happens to be the one I'm running, but you can also do the same on VirtualBox. The pfSense image works for both of them, and the network interface is set up maybe a slightly different, but you can basically accomplish the same level of functionality for both. So we'll go through, hypervisor setup in terms of getting those network adapters ready for your new and shiny firewall. We'll talk about how to install pfSense and do the basic configuration. And then we'll connect our Kali and our target machine into pfSense and make sure we can reach both of them. Then at the end, we'll have some space for QA. But as I said, feel free to cut me off, stop me at any point if you have questions. So to get started, we're gonna talk about what is pfSense, right? We want to make sure you understand what it is. So pfSense is first and foremost a free firewall or software-based firewall, right? So they do have a commercial version that costs money. They have some support plans that will cost you some money, but you can use pretty much all of their features for free forever, right? It's open source. They make it available to the community. They have a ton of good resources, a ton of good documentation, and you have to pay nothing, right? So very different from commercial solutions out there that only give you some, 30-day trial, 60, 90 days, whatever that is. This, you can have it forever. You get free upgrades. You get access to the modules. You can tweak pretty much everything. Now, the system is very, very complex, I'll say, in the sense of it can do a lot of things. And there's a million different configurations. I mean, there's even larger enterprise organizations who deploy pfSense on their production systems, right? So it will take a while. We're going to cover the basics today. Now, don't expect to come out of this being a master pfSense. But what I'll tell you is if you really want to become a master of pfSense, they have this great documentation. I'm going to drop the link on the chat here. This is their master documentation for the entire platform. It's a great place for resources and how to do specific things, but they also do a really great work at explaining some of the basic concepts, the routing, and what firewalls are and how to get the most out of it. So if you are going to be working with pfSense, I highly suggest you bookmark that page or save it somewhere, your notepad, whatnot. You will need this in the future, right? So what can we do with pfSense? Uh, as I mentioned, it's a lot of things, right? It can be your LAN or WAN router. It can be your edge firewall. It can be your DHCP server. It can do all of those at once. And it can also be deployed on a physical machine, right? We're going to go through it on a virtualized version of it. But if you have an old computer, right, maybe a spare laptop with a good Ethernet card and maybe another USB Ethernet card, or you have an old desktop computer, you can install the same pfSense on that old computer and have a physical firewall if that's what you want, right? A lot of us run our labs in virtualization, but a lot of people have spare equipment and they really enjoy, tinkering with hardware, and they like the feeling of like having a physical piece of equipment. So that's also something you can do. The installation will be pretty much the same. Configuration is also the same. And my favorite thing about pfSense is it has a web UI. So this is not one of those firewalls that you're gonna have to configure, um, using some CLI that looks scary and complex and remember a bunch of commands. This thing has a web UI. So we'll do some basic configuration, kind of like their CLI, just basically assign the interfaces. And after that, you can, open this interface that is very, very easy to use and has a ton of, resources to kind of guide you through it. That was personally one of my favorite things about pfSense. I hate, having to find a console cable and, you know, remote into a piece of equipment and get into the CLI, all of that. It's too much for a lab. I prefer to keep my lab simple. That's what I went with this. So now that we have kind of the basics covered, I want to review the hardware specs before we create a VM. So pfSense runs in very, very low resources, I'll say. You can have a 64-bit, modern CPU. I have deployed these things in computers, like, spare computers, 5, 6 years old, still runs. Right now, if you're trying to do hundreds of machines, deploy this in production, then I mean, definitely try to find some newer hardware. But if you're doing this in a lab, two virtual CPUs assigned to your VM should be enough. In terms of RAM, about a gig is plenty. I haven't seen usage jump in and making me want to upgrade mine to two or so. So one is enough. And space is also pretty modest requirements, right? About 8 gigs or so. On virtualization, if you're physical, usually about 64 gigs is like the smallest you'll find storage. So you should be good. Now, in terms of network interfaces, depending on how you want to set this up, I'll say usually you need at least two, right? In this case, we're going to set it up as the router for our entire lab. So we're going to need one Ethernet card to be your one interface, and then we're going to need another Ethernet card for our LAN interface. So at least two. Now, if you have more, you can do VLANs and VLAN tagging and all of that. Hopefully, we have enough time today, and we can cover how to do VLANs on VMware. That's the cool thing. It also supports VLANs. And then finally, if you're installing on a physical machine, of course, you're going to need a bootable USB. Or if you still have a DVD or CD reader, then one of those will be fine. In this case, we're using virtualization, so we'll just use an ISO image that we download from their website. So I already pre-downloaded, but just in case, let's review the process to download your image. So you go to pfSense.org. They have a download section here on top. And then pretty easy process architecture. You're always going to do AMD 64-bit if you're installing on a physical machine or a virtualized. So pfSense also sells their own hardware. They have, hardware that already comes preloaded with their software. So they have the option to download those images. That's what the Netgate option is. But we're going to be using an AMD 64. then you're going to pick what type of installer you need. In this case, because we're using, a virtual drive on the VM, we're going to go ahead and grab the DVD image ISO installer. Then once we have that, just pick the mirror. You can, leave it at the default or somewhere else. They have quite a few options in terms of the burst mirror to, get download going faster. And once you have that, just go ahead and click download. It'll take a few seconds and it will, start downloading your image. Of course, it's not starting the download here. Well, it is actually, sorry. Download it twice. All right, so you download your image. Another cool thing is, they give you the option to subscribe to their newsletter, all of that, but you don't have to enter your email, any personal information, not none of that to get access to their stuff. So it's truly free. You're not, given your personal data in exchange for it. You're not going to get annoying sales calls. An hour after you download your image, it's truly free for their community edition. So now that we have this image ready and downloaded, we're going to go ahead and open VMware. So I have already pre-staged a little bit of the VM. So as we talk about, we have 1 gig of memory. We have we have two vCPUs assigned. We have 8 gigs on the hard disk, and I already loaded the ISO image on my tray. But before we go ahead and fire this up, install pfSense, we need to configure our network interfaces. So as I mentioned, we need a WAN interface that's going to provide internet access. If you don't want your lab to have internet access, then you don't even need that, right? You just need a LAN interface. I like having the option of turning on and off internet access to my lab, just so I can get, Kali updates, things like that. I also run an Active Directory lab, so sometimes I want to patch my Windows Server machines. So to edit or network interfaces, we're going to go into edit, and there's a virtual network editor option. It does take a few minutes to load. So by default, when you install VMware Workstation, you get 3 network interfaces. So you're going to get a host only and a network that has DHCP enabled. You get a host only that doesn't have DHCP enabled. And then you get an adapter that is using NAT to bridge that connection between, or not bridge, but give you internet access on your VMs using the connection on your computer. So normally I'm just going to use that NAT adapter as my WAN adapter on pfSense. But all I want to do is I want to add an extra adapter that will be my LAN interface on the VM. So you have to go ahead and elevate permissions here for VMware in order to get the network editor to be able to work. And so we're going to go ahead and add a new network. We're going to give it you can give it a name. I just, leave the default. I just make sure I remember which adapter it is. So now I have VMnet 3, host only, right? That way it's not going to communicate with anything else. And then one thing I like doing is I am going to disable DHCP on this adapter because pfSense will be doing that for me. So we're going to turn that off. We want to have it connected. And we're going to go ahead and click apply. And it's going to take a minute. It will restart your VMware adapters, do all of that good stuff to get that adapter back up and running. Right. So now we have, as we said, we're going to use NAT for 1, and then we're going to use that new adapter VMnet 3 for our host only. So we're going to go ahead and close this, come back to our virtual machine, and we're going to edit this. So by default, VMware will always add at least 1 adapter to your computer, and this to your VM. In this case, it's already set as NAT, so we're going to leave it alone. Now we're going to go ahead and add, and then we're going to select the network adapter. And now here, we're going to make sure it's set up to be connected at power on. We're going to switch it to custom, and we're going to select VMnet 3. That is the one we have created for this, and we're going to go ahead and click OK. So we double check, we do have two network adapters, one using that will do or replace it for one adapter. We have one on that custom VMnet 3 that will be our LAN adapter for Firewall. And now we're going to go ahead and fire this up. All right, so you get the first pfSense boot screen. You can give it one of those options or just simply wait for it to load up. This will, load up the initial pfSense installer. Installation process is pretty straightforward. We're gonna leave it at all the default, so we're pretty much gonna run through this um, pretty quickly. So you give it a few minutes. Now, we build this with the very bare minimum recommended speeds, specs. So, it's going to take a minute or two to boot up, right? We got to give it some time. If you don't have the patience for that, you can feel free and increase your specs, give it more RAM, maybe add a couple more processors, things like that, depending on what resources you have available for this. And while we wait for the installer to finish loading, is there any questions so far? Anything you're hoping to see today?
Feel free to unmute yourselves or type the question or comment in the chat.
Right. So while this finished loading, another thing we want to do in the meantime is we want to go back to the other VMs, in this case, our Kali VM, uh, and we want to make sure that it's ready to connect to that pfSense firewall when it's ready, when we finish installation. So we're going to go ahead and edit this one. And I had it by default using that NAT adapter. So I'm going to go ahead, switch it to custom, and we're going to put it on that same network as the LAN port of pfSense. So that way it's going to be using that. I have just a Manjaro Linux VM that I'm going to be using as my target. I'm going to go ahead and edit that as well. So again, we selected VMnet 3 as our LAN port on pfSense. So we're going to go ahead and put these things in there so they're ready for us when pfSense has boot up. Like it's taken, there you go. So first thing you get kind of the standard, items. You get the EULA. Just go ahead and accept that. Not like you have a choice, right? It's not going to let you continue. We're just going to go ahead and install pfSense. So I said we're going to run through the defaults, right? I'm not going to change my key maps. I'm just going to let it auto partition. Right? It only has 8 gigs. Is the only thing running on this VM. So it's all good. We're going to leave everything else as it is the default. We're going to go ahead and tell it to install. I'm not going to be setting up anything, special in terms of RAID or anything. And then it's going to ask you for the last time if you're sure that you wanted to wipe the drive. This is a brand new VM, so it doesn't really matter. We're going to let it do what it needs to do. And then once you confirm, it's just going to start the installation process. The installation process goes pretty quick. Uh, it shouldn't take more than about 5 minutes or so, depending on the specs of your machine. And then once that is done, it will let us know, it will restart and then boot us up into the first kind of configuration assistant for pfSense. And then you can also add more than one LAN port, right? As I mentioned, if you want to do VLANs, you could do more LAN ports. If you just want to experiment with things, go ahead and add as many LAN ports as U1. So the installation process will take a little bit, goes pretty quick. Then the other thing we want to make sure is if you want to do VLANs, another way of doing it is you can come here and edit virtual machine settings, and this can be on any of the VMs. You come back to network adapter, and you have this option here that is called LAN segments. So you can add LAN segments to here, which basically creates additional adapters. So we can do a VLAN 1, and we can do a VLAN 2. Now that it's ready, we're going to go ahead and click OK. So now we have this other option that is called LAN segments. So if we wanted to put this in a LAN, we will, select it, put it on LAN segment 1. And then we will need to come back to pfSense and, re-add also another adapter for that LAN segment. We can do it after the installation. So installation is now finished. It's just asking us if you want to open a shell. So you don't want to open a shell. We just want to finish this and reboot. So it's going to go ahead and put up our pfSense for the first time. And for those of you who, are curious about the type of stuff, pfSense is based on FreeBSD. So it runs on FreeBSD as the base system, or base Linux distribution. So, the reason behind picking FreeBSD is just, widely supported, easy to maintain. So it has a good distribution backing up this project. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and put this on the right adapter, and then we'll come back to VLAN segments. First boot takes a little bit. It should be faster next time. It has quite a few services and things to check and start. It also runs through some, basic configuration. And so the first thing you're going to get here is this basic menu. So probably the only CLI configuration you will need to do for pfSense is this. So first thing we want to do is, if you see here, it gives you a few options of, what the menu is. So we're going to go ahead and press 1 to assign our interfaces. And then the first thing is it's going to ask you if VLANs should be set up right now. So we're going to go ahead and tell it no. We'll set up those later. So first is you need to select the one interface. So we know it was the first VM adapter we added. So we'll do EM0. And then we'll tell our VM or LAN adapter is that one, is the second one. You confirm those selections. We're going to go ahead and say yes. So it's getting your interfaces out. Gonna reload a couple of things. This is what I like, adding those interfaces in order, right? So I leave the default at 1, and then I add the other ones. That way, when I'm assigning interfaces, I know the first one is 1, and the second one is going to be the LAN. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to, as I mentioned, I want pfSense to be our DHCP server. So we're going to tell it to do that. So we're going to go ahead and do 2 for set interface IP addresses. We're going to leave the 1 alone because it's using that. It will get its own IP address. We're not going to touch that. We're going to go ahead and do 2 to configure the LAN interface. And for this, I'm just going to do a standard 10.10.1 for this IP address. We're going to do a 24-bit. We're gonna go ahead and press enter. We're gonna leave IPv6 alone, and we're gonna say yes, we do want to enable DHCP server. And so we're gonna start with the first IP address of a range, and then we're gonna end this at 254. Now we're not gonna. This is asking us if we want to revert to HTTP for the web UI, so we're gonna go ahead and do nope. And so now it's telling us that our pfSense web UI is going to be accessible on 10.10.1. We're going to go ahead and press enter, and you're back to that main menu. So we're going to go ahead and fire up our Kali machine. And if everything went well, we should be able to access that web UI for pfSense from Kali and start, getting things configured. Any questions so far? Is everybody following up, following along? Has everything been clear? We got a quiet crowd today, Leon.
Yeah, we kinda shy today.
Yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and log in into Kali. This is a great Kali background. We got, I think, Leon, you made this one, right?
I took the wallpaper from the internet and I placed the Kali and Raices logo.
That's
Yeah. So
cute. Where can I
yeah,
get
if any
that?
of you,
I can send it on the chat.
That'll be nice, thanks.
yeah, but if you want to represent Raices, get the wallpaper. There's actually a paired version too. I have it on my other VM.
Double nice. I'll take both.
Nice. All right. So now that Kali is fired up, the first thing we want to do is we're gonna go ahead and look at what IP address is this running, right? We connected it to our pfSense. pfSense is running DHCP, and we gave it a rate. So ideally, this machine should be pulling up an IP address on that range. And here it is. So we have 10.10.2. So that's a good sign, right? We're pulling on the right, um, range. So ideally, we have access to the pfSense web UI. Now we're gonna go ahead and come here in the browser and do 10.10. It's going to give you a certificate error, right? We're not running certificates on this. And then believe the password is, that's great. Sorry, trying to remember the defaults. All right, so default username is admin, password is pfSense. You can, of course, change that, and please change that. Don't run a firewall connected to the internet with default credentials. That will not be a good idea. So the first thing you're gonna get is the pfSense setup wizard. So we're just gonna, go ahead and do the typical next. We're gonna set up this host name. So we're gonna call this pfSense.raices. We're not gonna change the domain. Uh, if you want to run your own DNS server, this is where you can configure that. I am just gonna point this to Google. For lack of a better option. So we're going to go ahead and let it override DNS. So it forces everybody. This is where you want to configure your time zones. I believe. Oh, that's not the right time zone. That's great. Okay. Anyways, we can change that later. This is where you can change other things. This is the DHCP server. We already configured that. We're not going to mess with that right now. LAN IP address is already set. We're just going to confirm that. And this is where you're going to go ahead and change that password and begin. Once again, please change this. Don't go around running, default password on a firewall that has internet access. Go ahead and reload. Uh, this is going to take a couple of minutes because it has to reload quite a few modules and things to reflect some of the settings. And then once that is done, you're going to go ahead and get this nice screen. Tells you your wizard is complete. You can check for updates. It shouldn't be any updates, right? We just got this image off the website, so it should be pretty close to the latest and greatest. There's other packages that you can install into pfSense to do more advanced things. So sometimes while you may be running the latest, base pfSense version, uh, you may have updates to, third-party packages and modules. If you're running any of those, you get another EULA, so go ahead and, accept, close, click through all those boxes. So the first thing you get on your pfSense installation, and let's make this bigger a little, is your dashboard. So dashboard gives you a pretty quick overview of what's going on in your system. It gives you the name, what user you're logged in. You can have multiple users. So if you have, multiple people sharing the same lab and, you want to be safe and secure, you can create different users. It'll tell you machine ID, what release you're running. It'll give you some idea of your, CPU and what you have. Also tells you what DNS server you're using. And then it gives you an idea of where you are in resources. So if you see here, we give it about a gig of RAM. So we're already using about 32 CPU. We have 2 vCPUs and it's barely even really using any of it. Gives you an idea of the storage. So all the resources look good. It's going to tell you what interfaces are configured, what IP addresses they're running, and to make sure that they're up. So everything looks good so far. So now that pfSense is up, we know Kali, it's accessing things just fine, right? It has access. We know there's network and communication between Kali and the pfSense box. We're going to go ahead and turn on our target machine that we already placed on the same network. We're going to go through the same process. Just make sure that it can reach the firewall and that the pfSense is up and, talking to the target machine. While this Manjaro loads, we're going to go ahead and do a few things. So like any other firewall, you have rules. So if you go under here, firewall menu, and then rules, you're going to see your rules. Currently, there's none configure for the one, outside of the basic stuff. And then you set up your rule tables, independently for each interface. So you can have, different rules for different VLANs or, whatever else you have connected to each interface. So the default rule is an allow any. This is not recommended, right? You don't want to allow any traffic on a firewall. This is the equivalent of not having a firewall. It just lets everything through. So you will customize those to whatever is your needs, right? Um, you can block traffic between VLANs. You can only you can add a rule to block it from talking to the one interface, so blocks any traffic out to the internet. That way, you can set up the one interface in case you ever need it, but it's not always active, right? You plays a role, and if you ever need to run updates, whatnot, you can delete it or deactivate it temporarily. So all rules have these options. So you have an edit, you can copy a rule if you're kind of using the same settings over and over just for different VLANs, then you can just copy the rule over, rename and adjust the networks. You can deactivate a rule temporarily, or you can delete a rule entirely. You can also move rules up and down. Remember, it will start applying whatever is on top first and then go down the list. So this is how you reorganize them. You have the selection boxes and you can move them up or down. I'll also show you the current state of every rule. That way you can, verify they're working. Let's go back. So we see our Manjaro's up. So we're going to do the same do an IPA, verify that we did get IP address on the range for the pfSense, and we can do a ping to make sure that we can communicate. And there you go. So firewall is up and running. It's working. It's routing traffic, so that's good. This gives you, why you want to have a firewall in your lab is gives you an extra protection, right? You can make sure that your lab traffic is not affecting anything else on the network, right? If you share the home network with other devices, family, spouses, kids, whatnot, gives you an ability to isolate your traffic, create your own rules, and then it also gives you ability to practice different things, right? You can do firewall bypass, right? You can add rules and see how those rules affect some of the tools and things you use on your everyday, right? You can try different mmap scans with different firewall rules and see how those scans change. And also, when you have VLANs, it allows you to have different labs. In my case, I have a VLAN for my Active Directory lab. I have a VLAN for kind of just my standard Kali and whatever vulnerable machine I'm playing with that week. And then I have another VLAN for some of like just the random Linux distributions that I want to test on VMs, things like that. So that's also another option, right? Gives you can do IP address ranges, um, and all that good stuff. Try different things. If you're also trying to get into networking and learn a little bit more about networking, um, it's a good way to play with a firewall and all these routing rules, and you can also use it as a VPN to get familiar, with all these concepts. If you're trying to build up your resume and your professional experience, now you can say you have deployed a firewall, right? You now know how to configure firewalls. You can, comfortably say, hey, I know how to do VLANs because I have VLANs on my home lab. So all of this helps you build your resume, build those skills. This is, as we said at the beginning, right? This is something that is suited for enterprise applications. So you can grab this and use it now how we're using it with, 2 or 3 machines, or you can create, this massive deployments using pfSense, right? And document all of this, put it on your resume, write a blog post, use it to help your job search, career development, or just for fun, right? Some people just like saying, yeah, I have a fancy lab with a firewall. And the cool thing is if you have a computer that has multiple interfaces, you could bridge this to a physical lab deployment. So you can run pfSense on the lab, and we could grab, if I had a second interface, I grab one other physical interface, and instead of using NAT for it, I could bridge that interface and connect it to a small switch, and now you can connect other physical machines on your network through that switch that will be routed by pfSense. So you're now bridging your virtual lab with real lab, right? Let's say you want to find an old laptop and connect it to your pfSense, or maybe you're running Kali bare metal on a separate computer. You can use that, put it, connect it to your pfSense, and use your bare metal Kali on a spare computer to attack your virtual VMs. Maybe you have, old network equipment, right? Switches, routers, APs, things like that you want to test with pfSense. You can do that if you have extra Ethernet adapters laying around, or your computer has a card with multiples. That is always other things you can do. I know we have a little bit over 10 minutes, so I want to open it up for questions. Anything else you want to see? I want to, open it up to you. So feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, drop it on the chat.
Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you guys taking time of your Saturday to join us.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there a way you could, or have you ever like deployed a pfSense instance that was like previously saved. Like if you want to create a lab with a specific setup, you'll be like, okay, I have a file for this setup here. I'll just load it up. Can you do that?
Well, you can do it a few different ways, right? You can take a snapshot of the VM and save that snapshot. You can go through your entire firewall configuration and then export that VM as an OVA. That way you can import it into other computers. And then I believe pfSense has an option where you can export the current configuration on the firewall, and then you can create it as a backup and then restore from a backup. Yeah, there you go. Backup and restore. So after you go through this configuration and you set up your lab, you can go ahead and download this entire config as an XML file and save it somewhere in your computer. And that way, you can come and restore it. So if you maybe have different flavors of your pfSense, like one with VLANs and one without VLANs, one with DHCP and one without DHCP, you can have all those XML configuration files and then just take a snapshot of the fresh pfSense install before you configure anything, right? Kind of like first login, go through the wizard, stop there, and take a snapshot of that. That way you have a VM, a fresh install pfSense that you can always restore, and then just use configuration files to backup and restore. Is that sort of what you were asking?
Yeah, cool. Okay, yeah. Because I thought VMware couldn't take snapshots. So,
Oh yeah,
but
you can. I don't know if you can do it on Player. I have
Yeah,
VMware
yeah.
Workstation Pro.
You cannot
So I
okay.
do have the
you
ability
cannot
to do
take
snapshots.
you cannot take snapshots in VMware Player. You need the Pro version. But VirtualBox does take a snapshot, the free version.
Okay, yeah, yeah. But that's good. Yeah, you can export the settings.
Actually, the one I run on my production lab, right? The lab I keep kind of like on a more regular setup. I have those backups, right? I have a fresh install snapshot of pretty much every VM in that lab, including pfSense, and then I have the XML backup for my settings. Um, and if you are a later time, if you're setting up your virtual box, feel free to ping me on the Discord, and I can help you set up the network interfaces. I don't think we have enough time to go through it right now. I also don't have a fresh install of VirtualBox, but if you need help with that, let me know.
Yeah, we have time. For you, we have 10 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think in 10 minutes I can get it up and running. Uh,
I mean, setting the network interface.
well, on VirtualBox, yeah, give me one sec. Let me just install it. Maybe we'll. If anybody else has a question, feel free to ask while I work on this. Maybe we can get the VirtualBox running.
I actually had another question. Can you set up port mirroring on pfSense?
Yes, you can do port mirroring. I actually have it set up. I have a port mirror on a span port on my lab to do um, Security Onion. So I have Security Onion kind of collecting all data and logs and traffic from the network, and I use a mirror for that.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Think probably, and Leon, we can probably do this for the fall series. Is we can do a Security Onion, so we can do a full lab with um, pfSense, Security Onion to
Yeah,
get some of those logs and traffic.
yeah, we were planning for the fall series, talking about topics like open bass, WASU, security onion, MFA, Splunk, Active Directory, and so on. We're
There you
looking
go.
for
So,
we're
great
looking
timing.
for
We have
speakers. Yeah,
pfSense building the foundation, and then we can, start digging into all of those more advanced configurations. So
Have
I got
you?
VirtualBox running. If we go here to File, there is a host network manager, and it's the equivalent of the network editor. And so you just do a create. You have to elevate permissions, so make sure you have a machine where you're an admin. And it does take a little bit longer, probably because I'm also still running 3 VMs on the other side. But it gives you it creates an adapter right away, defaults to host only, defaults to DHCP disabled. So now we have this adapter ready, right? And the process is the same. You're going to add a new VM. Just make sure you switch this to Linux, and I usually just do other 64. Yeah, we need a virtual disk, 8 gigs. Just take a minute for it to create things. We actually shut down some of these VMs. There you go. And so now here, we're going to go ahead and do settings. And you're going to go under the network section. So adapter 1, you're going to leave it at NAT, right? And then adapter 2, first you enable it, and then we're going to go ahead and grab that host only adapter, and then select that adapter 2 we just created. You need to deploy the band. So enable adapter 2, host only adapter, and then have, select the one you created. So same thing, we have one using NAT, and then we have our LAN port being adapter 2. And then we're going to go ahead and load up that pfSense image. And we're going to go ahead and spin this up. So install process will be the same, but the only really real difference is just that network adapter configuration. Just, where the menus are located and, what things are named or whatnot. So basically, for what you're saying, poor Marion, in the case of Security Onion, you just add an extra LAN adapter or an extra host-only adapter that will be then later on pfSense you will configure as your span port to mirror that traffic onto Security Onion. And then from here, you can just take, if you go under machines, there is tools and then snapshots. So you can take one and save it once you finalize your configuration, right? Once you complete the install, you can do it right before you hit the wizard, or right after you complete the wizard. It's up to you. But this is how you take the snapshots in Oracle VirtualBox, which is free. This will help you solve that limitation with Workstation Player.
That's awesome. Thanks for showing.
Yeah, anytime. And I'm always here on the Raices Discord. Feel free to tag me on any of the channels, and I'm happy to answer any questions.